For today's critical thought, we're going to be talking about onboarding once again, and how a recent example of a game is so bad at it that we're going to have to go into a full-on reaction of my own play to talk about it. Normally for these videos we have some kind of supplemental footage up in the corner there, but because we're going to be spending so much time on it, we're going to leave it empty for right now. Before we get to our example, which if I did my thumbnail right, we'll spoil it here with Besiege, I want to talk a bit about when should you consider onboarding for your mechanics and systems, because every genre and every design is different. But there are a few rules that are universal. So the first thing is that there is such a thing as kind of like bread and butter elements in a game that you don't need to spend as much time on. And this typically corresponds to elements that have essentially become universal when it comes to games. Press spacebar to jump in a platformer, right trigger on a controller to shoot, and there's a few other ones as well. These are elements that become so ingrained in terms of their genre that it does become more of a universal aspect. But with that said though, every aspect of your game deserves at least some measure of onboarding. As we've talked about, every game is somebody's first. And just as you'll have somebody who's played dozens upon dozens of platformers, you may also have somebody who has never done a jump before, picking up your game for the first time. And it's important from a design standpoint to be able to think about your game along those lines. Now, there are going to be people who will, of course, argue and joke, why do I need to know press left thumbstick to move around? Well, guess what? That information is not for you. And it's important from a development standpoint not to listen to your expert players in this regard. Because no matter how your niche, your genre is, onboarding and playability are universal concepts, and it will hurt you as a developer if you don't think about your game this way, especially if you're trying to reach a broader market. Now, drilling down a little bit further, secondary systems or sub-mechanics in a game definitely need to have some element of onboarding. And what we mean by this are systems that are not easily explained or not exactly one-to-one in terms of player interaction. So this will be stuff like how happiness works in Civilization, the cover system in XCOM, and another way to think about it, any unique selling points in terms of your game's design. If your game is different in any way from the contemporary or the more popular examples, you need to onboard the player here, because they are not going to be able to transfer knowledge from one game into your own. So if your game has some special rules for how stealth works or how combat is calculated, you need to consider this and onboard it for a player. And this is why for RPGs that they can be very hard to learn alongside strategy and 4X games, because a lot of the rules and systems that dictate win or loss are always under the surface. When I click a button in Civilization or Europa Universalis, I don't know what's going to impact 20, 30, 50 turns from now. And oftentimes these games will just hit the player with everything right from the get-go and say, okay, enjoy, try and figure it out. And when that happens, it leaves a new player just in, deer in the headlights mode, and it becomes very hard to enjoy a game. Now, as we've talked about in previous pieces, a good UI is not meant to tell the player how to play the game. It's to give them all the information they need to make those decisions. And like we've said, this is done on a game-by-game basis. Something that works for a platformer is not the same as a grand strategy, or a tactical RPG, or a roguelike, light, rouge-light, however we want to describe it. But we've been talking around this, I think, for the last 4 minutes. That should be enough time. We're going to take our quick Patreon supporter and sponsor break now, and when we come back, we're going to dive into about 15 to 20 minutes of Besiege and talk about how this game fails the onboarding process and what it could do differently to make things better. And now for a quick shout out to our current Game Wisdom supporters and sponsors. Going forward, all Patreon supporters will get early access to our videos. And if you'd like to continue this discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, link down below. If you're looking for more wisdom about game design, be sure to check out my latest offering of books, 20 Essential Games to Study, aimed for first-time developers and students looking for some inspiration for their upcoming games, and Game Design Deep Dive Platformers if you're interested in anything regarding 2D and 3D platforming design. They're both available in print, digital, and wherever books are being sold. Alright, so I am actually overlaying my little window down here over the old one for when we were doing this on the grab bag. And I'll be pausing and playing the footage as we talk a little bit more about some of the issues Besiege has. And at this moment, Besiege is at 1.0, so it is fair to kind of talk about some of the limitations and issues we're having with the onboarding process. So, right from the get-go, we have a pretty big issue. There is nothing here on this title screen to walk a new player through what is it they should be doing right now. And again, when we talk about games that make use of unique systems and aspects to it, you need to give the player some place to start. Now, of course, it certainly looks nice, the fact that we're rotating the planet around. But I'm going to fast forward a little bit here and get to our first little bit of an issue. So this is the very first map of the game. And I'm going to pause it right here because we have two very big issues. The first one is that while maybe kind of hard to see with the title up there and things darkened down there, but there are a lot of icons on those aspects that are not explained or referenced at all by the game. And this is a very big no-no. When you make use of symbology or unique aspects, you need to explain to the player what this all means. And simply just having tooltips isn't enough here. Because I need to know where should my eyes be focusing on right now. From a design standpoint, you would assume it would be the tutorial message over there. But I'm going to pause it again because there's a few big problems here. That tells me absolutely nothing. Where do I go click these wooden blocks? How do I place them in the world? What does that shape mean? Whenever we talk about onboarding a game, I need to know at all times what I'm doing, how do I do it, and why do I do this. And for this right here, the game is not giving me any indication on any of those points. And again, the guidebook that you see in the upper left hand, that's not good enough. Remember, if you're onboarding the player, they must be able to learn it from within the game space itself. And anything outside of that is just going to add frustration to it. And again, I'm told to click on wheels. And it's giving me select wheels, so I would click it down here. But again, it would have helped to give some kind of visual indicator on what to click. Once again, we're not being given any real information, or not even any real confirmation that we are doing something properly. And that is not how you want somebody to learn, especially if your game is unique. And something like with Besiege is an entirely unique form of design. Oh, now here's another very big one. Place your machine on the ground with this icon. Okay, unless you are purposely or you already know where that icon is on the UI, you're going to have to search for it. And it would have helped out just to simply have it like flashing for a second. And this is why you need to be very careful about your onboarding. And one thing that is a very big damning point against Besiege is that this is the same exact quote-unquote tutorial that was in the game 3 years ago. And that is a design sin in my book. As we've said before, The first thing in your game should always be saved for last, or at least to be refined last, because you want to make sure that you know exactly how your game plays out, and you want to be able to give the player as formal of an understanding on the design as possible, given the tools that you have. The fact that they did no adjustments or changes to the onboarding is a very serious problem. And they're not the only ones who have done this. I've seen other indie games that have failed to provide any kind of onboarding. Now here's problem number 2. They're introducing the act of rotating the camera in Lesson 2, but we would still have to really make use of it in Lesson 1. Remember, if something is relevant to the learning process of what you're trying to do, you need to put it on the screen. You need to reference it right now. This would be like having a tutorial about how to jump in a platformer 30 minutes after the player's been doing jumping challenges. And again, this will have also been a good place to add in more elements or give the player more of a walkthrough as to what does all the UI elements on the screen mean. This is simply, in actuality, just a dead lesson, because the camera control should have really been in Lesson 1 before we started to place stuff and put things together. And again, you're not giving the player things in a valid perspective or an organized way. Now, as we move over to number 3 here, now we're introduced to steering. And steering is a very important concept for Besiege, because it's how you move your character or move your vehicles. And this is a lesson that needs to do more for such an important topic. And again, I should be getting pop-ups and more information. Let me know what I'm clicking on. Why do I place things? And right here, I also want to pause. And again, I know I keep pausing here. From what they're explaining, using that very simple icon over there, is I'm supposed to delete the wheels I have, place the hinges on, and then replace those wheels. But there's a big problem. The game hasn't actually taught me yet how do I delete stuff off my vehicle. And like we're saying, if you're not teaching things in order of importance or order of relevancy, then you are failing at the onboarding process. And I spend more time than I should just trying to figure out how do I delete stuff. And I'm pretty sure I screwed up the hinges because of that. And again, there's information, there's things I can click on that's going to add complexity to the game that I should not be able to look at right now because I'm still trying to learn things. And this is why it's often a good idea in onboarding, when it comes to very complicated games, to turn off or restrict the number of on-screen elements and introduce them as the player becomes more comfortable in the design. So we're going to fast forward a little bit more. And now we get to this mission. And this is when we're introduced to enemies who can attack your vehicle. And once again, the game is missing a lot of UI elements. It's not teaching about how damage works. What are the enemies actually doing? And here's another big one. There doesn't seem to be a way to hit that building without creating or using a weapon. But guess what? The game is not giving me any tutorial or any onboarding to explain how weapons work. Now, I know a few of you will argue that you should be learning the game as you go. But again, when we're talking about foundational elements, how your game works at the basic level, this is not where you want things to be complicated. If you want the player to begin building up a schema or how the understanding of how this world and the game mechanics are supposed to work, they need the basic elements. This is why Factorio worked so well. It introduced things in a controlled environment, it gave you a sense of progression in terms of unlocking new content, and made sure that the player understood concept A before it goes to concept B, and C, and D. In this one, this is a horrible way to teach somebody. And the more that I play this, the more frustrating it got to be fighting the UI and fighting the onboarding to try and learn this game. And if we fast forward a little bit more with me, fumbling around with this vehicle, I think we'll get to the mission where I just kind of stopped caring about Besieged. I think this was the point where I was trying to see there's an actual tutorial, and guess what? I couldn't find any. But here's how I was looking at the achievements. We did that one already. And then this is where I just stopped with the game. Because at this point, they're not even giving me any sense of onboarding or tutorial guidance anymore. I haven't even done anything in terms of multiple layers of the UI and elements I can add on, and the game assumes that I've mastered everything by now. And again, I haven't. And most players who have started playing this game with no information or no going into this with previous knowledge, they're going to get frustrated and stop playing. And I know somebody's going to comment below and say, just watch some YouTube videos on the game. And that is another design sin. As a game developer, you should not have to rely on your community to fix your own problems. And oftentimes, this is where we run into some of the games that just don't end up doing well, because the developers don't want to fix their issues. And again, people will probably say just get good, but people or consumers don't have the time to spend fighting a game. And with something as powerful as Besiege, I know there are people who have mastered this game. And there's a market for this, and a lot of people are going to just give up and just stop playing this game very early. In fact, if it wasn't the fact that I was playing this on stream, I probably would have stopped playing this 5 to 6 minutes in because the game was starting to annoy me. And when a game is frustrating to play minute 1, that's a serious problem. You can see I kind of already gave up on the game. So I'm going to just go back and you can just watch some as a B-roll while I continue talking. Like we're saying, when your game has unique aspects to it, you need to focus on the onboarding process with it. And for a game that's been in early access for so long and to have so little done to educate people about how to play the game is just a horrible way to design a game. And I know developers have certainly made enough money on this one after all the YouTubers caught wind of it and made all their reaction videos to it. But for a game to hit 1.0, this is a horrible example of a game at 1.0. Because I don't even know what's really been done to justify putting this game at 1.0. Some people have said that multiplayer mode has been put in the level header, but guess what? That doesn't help me with trying to learn this game. And like we've said, if you don't think about this stuff, you are never going to grow as a game developer. But with that, we're going to wrap things up for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and can you think of other games that did a horrible job when it comes to onboarding? And can you think of titles that did do an amazing job of teaching a player very complicated or very esoteric designs? Let me know in the comments below, but come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until next time, take care. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel linked down below, where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it. And tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.